They told him to fly or die. For 47 days, the kidnapped pilot refused, but the weapons lord never touched a weapon. He used his blind 12-year-old daughter instead. She passed a note the guards couldn't read, written in a language of raised dots, and with that single line of Braille, she didn't just ask for help. She showed him they were both prisoners in the same sky. The pilot was Captain Arlo Vance. The girl was Ilara. Her father, known only as Kronos, didn't deal in bullets or bombs. He traded in human cargo, and his private jet was a moving prison. Vance's defiance was a death sentence. But in that sealed cabin, 35,000 feet above any law, a blind child saw the truth he was too angry to see. She was his only way out. But to escape, he would have to become her kidnapper. Arlo Vance wasn't chosen at random. His file was clean. A former Air Force pilot turned private charter captain, he had a reputation for discretion and a 98% on-time arrival rate. That's what Kronos purchased. A 6-month contract to fly a custom-converted Gulfstream G600 on a closed circuit between Caracas, Dubai, and a private strip in international waters. The money was a king's ransom, paid in untraceable cryptocurrency. Vance asked no questions. He thought he was moving high-net-worth individuals. He was wrong. The first flight should have been the red flag. No passengers boarded. Only 23 sealed titanium crates, each the size of a coffin, loaded by men who never made eye contact. The manifest listed them as diplomatic materials. The weight distribution was all wrong for documents. It was the weight of human beings. By the third flight, Vance heard the muffled crying. He confronted the head of security, a man named Rook, whose face was a topographic map of scars. Rook didn't deny it. He simply pressed a pistol to Vance's temple and said the new terms. You fly, you see nothing, you hear nothing, or we drop your body from the wheel well over the Pacific. Your choice. Vance flew. For 3 months, he became a ghost in the cockpit, the hum of the engines drowning out the horror in the cabin behind the fortified door. His moral calculus was simple. If he refused, they'd kill him and get another pilot. The cargo would still move. If he stayed alive, there might be a chance, someday, to do something. He was clinging to that fantasy when Kronos himself boarded in Dubai. He was a man of chilling calm, mid-50s, tailored suit, hands that had never seen manual labor. He carried a leather-bound book of poetry, and he brought his daughter, Ilara. She was led aboard by a female guard, her small hand on the woman's elbow, her clouded eyes seeing nothing. Kronos called her his precious jewel. He installed her in a specially designed suite in the rear of the plane, a gilded cage with padded walls and a library of Braille books. She was, he explained to no one in particular, too delicate for the world. The sky was her sanctuary. But hear what Vance observed in the long, silent hours. The girl was never allowed off the plane. Not in Caracas, not in Dubai. The guards who brought her meals never spoke to her. Her father's visits were brief, clinical check-ins. He would test her on her Braille lessons, praise her accuracy, and leave. There was no warmth, only assessment. She was another piece of high-value inventory kept under climate control. The kidnapping happened on the ground in Caracas. Vance was in the cockpit running pre-flight checks. 4 armed men from a rival syndicate stormed the hangar. A firefight erupted. Rook and 2 Kronos loyalists were gunned down. The rival boss wanted the plane and its routing codes. He also wanted the pilot. Vance was dragged from his seat, beaten, and thrown into what had been the crew's rest quarters, now a makeshift cell. They killed Kronos' guards, but they kept the girl. Why? Because even rivals knew Ilara was Kronos' single point of emotional leverage, a weakness in a man who showed none. For 47 days, the new captors tried to break Vance. They needed him to fly complex routes to new buyers. He refused. The beatings were professional, designed to cause agony, not permanent damage. A pilot with broken hands is useless. They threatened to kill the girl. Vance called their bluff. If you kill her, he said, you have 0 leverage over Kronos, and I have 0 reason to cooperate. It was a stalemate painted in blood and fear. His only interaction with Ilara was auditory. He heard her being led past his door to the lavatory, heard the soft scratching of her fingers on her Braille pages during the long hours. He never heard her cry, never heard her speak. Her silence was more unnerving than the screams of the other prisoners who occasionally filled the cabin. She was a ghost in a machine of ghosts. Then, on the 48th morning, the guard shift changed. The new sentry was lazy, propping Vance's cell door open for better airflow. From his cot, Vance could see a sliver of the corridor. he saw Ilara being led back from the lavatory. As she passed his door, her hand trailed along the wall, and she let something fall, a small, crumpled ball of paper from the pocket of her dress. It landed just inside his cell. The guard didn't see it. His eyes were glued to a soccer match on his phone. Vance waited until the man looked away, then slowly stretched his leg, hooking the paper with his foot and dragging it to his hand. He unfurled it. The page was from one of her Braille books, but punched into the paper, amidst the official raised dots, was a new pattern, a message made from pinpricks. He ran his fingertips over the bumps. He was no expert, but his Air Force training included basic survival codes. This was different, deliberate, a sequence. It took him 2 hours of painful concentration, mapping the dots to the alphabet he barely remembered. The message was only 3 words that changed everything, not his daughter. Vance stared at the page, his blood turning to ice. If she was Kronos' daughter, who was she, and why was she here? The implications detonated in his mind. Her blindness, her perfect isolation. She wasn't a treasured heir. She was a ledger, a living, breathing record. Kronos wasn't protecting her. He was preserving her. She had seen things, heard things in her gilded cage. Her blindness made her invisible to men who trusted their eyes. She was the ultimate witness. And she had just broken a silence more fortified than the plane's door. She had trusted him. The weight of that trust was a heavier burden than any rifle butt to his ribs. He had to answer her. But how? He had no Braille writer, no pin. Then he looked at his meal tray, a plastic spoon. He snapped the handle, creating a sharp, jagged point. He smoothed the Braille page on his knee, and with agonizing slowness, he began to puncture a reply next to her message. 1 dot for A. 2 for B. Who are you? He waited for her next pass. When she came by, he held the page out in the sliver of light, his fingers tapping the new dots. She paused, her head tilted, as if listening to a distant frequency. Her hand brushed the guard's arm, a prearranged signal to stop. She knelt, pretending to tie her shoe. Her fingers found the page. She read his question in a second, and as she stood, she let another paper ball drop. This one had a longer message. Vance decoded it feverishly. ELAAVSQEZ, girl from Quito, took ME 4 years ago, he kills the others. KEPSME to remember, the horror solidified. Kronos was a collector, he didn't just traffic children, he curated them. And for some twisted reason, he had chosen to keep Ilara. Her blindness wasn't an obstacle, it was the point. She couldn't identify buyers or locations, she could only store information. Information he could access anytime, simply by asking her. She was his living, breathing hard drive. Vance stabbed a new reply into the paper. How do we get out? Her response came on her next return trip. The note was simpler, must fly, only way, trust flight plan. The flight plan, of course, Kronos' original encrypted routes. The rival gang had the codes, but they didn't have Vance's compliance. If he agreed to fly, he could input the original coordinates. Kronos had tracking implants in the airframe. He would know the moment his plane entered friendly airspace. He would come for it. It was a suicide mission. They would be flying from one captor into the hands of another, but it was the only play on the board. Vance made his decision. He called for the guard. Tell your boss, he said, his voice raw, I'll fly. But the girl comes to the cockpit. I need an assistant for the pre-flight checks. The guard, eager to please his superiors, agreed. An hour later, Vance was back in the left seat, the familiar controls under his hands. Ilara was strapped into the jump seat behind him, a headset over her ears. The rival boss stood in the doorway, grinning. See, everyone has a price. As the engines whined to life, Vance reached back and found Ilara's hand. He placed the crumpled Braille page in her palm and closed her fingers over it. Then, he guided her fingers to the central navigation console. He pressed her fingertips against the keypad. She understood immediately. As he went through the vocal pre-flight checklist, her fingers danced silently over the numbers, inputting the long string of coordinates from Kronos' original flight plan. The coordinates she had memorized from hearing them repeated for years. The rival boss, watching from behind, saw only a blind girl fidgeting. He saw nothing. The plane taxied, then roared down the runway, climbing into the night sky over Venezuela. Freedom was a lie. They were flying straight back to the devil, but they were flying together. And as the coastline disappeared beneath a blanket of clouds, the cockpit door suddenly buzzed and locked from the outside. The boss's voice crackled over the intercom. Change of plan, Captain. We're not going to Kronos. We are selling you and the girl to a new bidder. The coordinates in that system, they're being erased right now. Vance stared at the navigation screen. The numbers were blinking, then one by one turning to zeros. They were alone in the sky, in a stolen plane, with an erased destination. And in the dark cabin behind that locked door, he heard the distinct sound of a weapon being racked. Vance's training took over before his fear could. A locked cockpit door on a Gulfstream isn't like a commercial airliner. It's reinforced, yes, but it's designed for privacy, not a siege. The electronic lock had a manual override on his side, a recessed handle under the console, but engaging it would be a declaration of war. The sound would carry. He looked at Ilara. Her head was tilted, listening to the faint hiss of the intercom, her fingers frozen over the now blank navigation screen. He reached back and took her hand. With his index finger, he traced letters on her palm. OVID, she nodded, understanding. Then she spelled back onto his arm, her touch feather light. WAIT, she pointed to her ear, then toward the cabin door. She was listening to something he couldn't hear. The argument. The rival boss, a man they called Lagos, was yelling at someone. The coordinates are gone, you idiot. How do we explain this to the buyer? We have a plane with no destination. This was their only sliver of advantage. Lagos was panicking. A lost flight plan in illegal airspace was a beacon for every agency with a radar. Vance traced another message on Ilara's palm, new plan. He pointed to the secondary radio, the one used for internal aircraft comms, separate from the locked-out main system. He could patch it to the satellite phone line, but he needed a number. He looked at Ilara, hope a desperate knot in his chest. Did she know a number? Anyone? She furrowed her brow, then slowly spelled into his hand, BYHEARTONLYONE. She began to tap a sequence on his arm, a long international number. Vance's blood went cold. He recognized the country code, Switzerland, a private bank, not a rescue line, a financial trigger. Ilara spelled the final word, SAFEBOX Kronos' escape fund. If that number was dialed under a specific duress code, it would initiate a financial dead man's switch, draining accounts, releasing encrypted dossiers to preset recipients. It wouldn't save them. It would scorch the earth for Kronos and everyone connected to him, including the men on the other side of the door. It was a weapon, not a lifeline. Vance shook his head. He spelled NOMERCY. She gripped his hand tighter, her small fingers insistent. She spelled again, NOTFORUSFORTHEOTHERS. The other children, the ones in the crates, the ones who didn't get kept. She was offering a nuclear option. If they were going to die, she wanted to burn the whole network down with them. Before Vance could decide, the cockpit door shuddered under a heavy blow. Lagos's voice, muffled but venomous, came through the composite material. Open the door, Vance. We are changing course the old-fashioned way. You're going to fly where I point, or I start shooting through this door. Blind girl first. Vance's mind raced. Shooting the door was a bluff. A bullet could rupture the pressure hull, depressurize the cabin, kill them all. But Lagos was desperate. Desperate men do stupid things. Vance did the only thing he could. He hit the manual override. The lock disengaged with a loud, mechanical clunk that silenced the blows. He didn't open the door. He picked up the cabin intercom mic, his voice flat and controlled. Shoot the door, Lagos, and we all meet the ocean in about 12 seconds. You need me conscious to fly this thing. You need the girl alive to sell her. You have nothing to negotiate with, but I have something you want. Silence from the other side. Then what? A destination, Vance said. I have the original Kronos coordinates, not in the computer, in my head. I flew them 100 times. You think I needed a screen? You get one shot. You let me input them, we fly to a neutral landing zone of my choosing, not your buyer's dock. You get the plane, we walk away. You try anything else, I put this bird into a dive so steep your eardrums will explode before you can pray. It was a lie. He didn't have all the coordinates, but he had the final approach sequence for the water strip, the last 10 minutes of the journey. It was a seed. If he could get them close, Kronos' people would detect the plane. It would draw the wolf back to the fight. Lagos laughed, a harsh, broken sound. You think I'm a fool? You input coordinates, you send a signal. No, you tell them to me. I'll input them from out here. Impossible, Vance countered. The nav system is locked from in here after your little erasure stunt. It needs pilot authorization, biometric. My hand on the reader. You have 3 minutes before we drift into Panamanian-controlled airspace and get lit up by fighter jets. Your choice. He was buying time, weaving truth and fiction. The biometric part was true. The fighter jets were a hopeful fantasy, but the threat of sovereign airspace was real. He heard frantic whispering on the other side of the door. Lagos was consulting with someone. Ilara tugged his sleeve. She held up her hand, fingers splayed. 5. Then she made a rocking motion like a cradle. Then she pointed violently at the door. Vance didn't understand. 5 children here now, she nodded emphatically, then mimed being sick. The other cargo, Lagos had taken on other prisoners during the 47 days. 5 more souls in the cabin. This changed the calculus entirely. Lagos wasn't just a mercenary. He was now a transporter with live inventory. He couldn't afford a shootout any more than Vance could. The door handle turned. It opened just a crack, the barrel of a pistol visible in the gap. Lagos's eye peered through. No funny business. You input the coordinates. I watch your every move. The girl stays in my sight. You try to send a signal. I put a bullet in her spine. She'll live, but she'll never walk again. Understood. Understood, Vance said, his voice hollow. The door opened fully. Lagos stood there, pistol aimed steadily at Ilara's head. 2 of his men flanked him, their weapons trained on Vance. The cabin behind them was a shadowy pit, but Vance could see small shapes huddled under blankets on the divans. 5 of them. Vance slowly reached for the navigation console, placing his palm on the scanner. It lit up green, the system unlocked. Now he thought, now was the moment. He could input a Mayday code, a squawk that would light up every air traffic control screen from here to Miami. It would be a death sentence. Lagos would shoot, but it might save the 5 in the cabin. He glanced at Ilara. She was sitting perfectly still, but her hand was hidden in the folds of her dress. She was writing. Scratching something on the paper she always kept in her pocket. She was leaving a record. Do it, Lagos snarled. Vance began inputting numbers, the real initial coordinates for the water strip, thousands of miles away. As he typed the 7th digit, a sudden, violent alarm blared through the cockpit, a loud, pulsing horn. Master caution lights flashed red across the panel. Lagos jumped, his gun wavering. What did you do? Vance's eyes scanned the instruments, his pilot's brain processing. It wasn't him, it was a system alert, fuel imbalance, critical. One of the wing tanks was feeding too fast, a likely bullet hole from the Caracas firefight finally causing a major leak. The plane was bleeding out in midair. We have to descend, Vance barked, his hands already moving over the controls. Now, we're losing fuel pressure, we won't make it 100 miles. Where? The nearest coast. Lagos was stunned, his plan unraveling. I don't know, you're the pilot. Vance brought up the emergency terrain map. The only land within their gliding distance was a jagged, green coastline. The Caribbean side of Costa Rica, dense jungle, few roads, but a nation with no extradition treaty with the US, a smuggler's paradise. It was also Chrono's territory, a web of clandestine airstrips used for refueling. We are landing there, Vance stated, banking the plane sharply toward the new heading. Whether you like it or not, tell your men to brace. The following 20 minutes were a controlled nightmare. Vance fought the controls as the failing engine caused a vicious yaw. He was flying a wounded bird, heavy on one side. Ilara remained silent, but her hand was out, resting on the auxiliary control panel, feeling the vibrations of the straining aircraft as if reading its vital signs. She suddenly tapped a frantic rhythm on the console. Vance looked. She was pointing at the fuel gauge for the good tank. It was dropping too fast now. Not a leak, a transfer valve failure. Fuel was being pumped from the good tank into the leaking one, then dumped into the sky. They were seconds from total double-engine failure. He had one chance, an emergency procedure he'd only ever simulated: isolate the tanks. It required flipping a guarded switch, then manually cranking a fuel shutoff valve located not in the cockpit, but in the main cabin's aft equipment bay, behind Lagos and his men. He announced it calmly, there's a manual shutoff in the back. If I don't crank it, both engines flame out in 90 seconds. We crash into the jungle, no survivors, no sail. Lagos's face was slick with sweat. Do it. I have to do it, Vance said, unstrapping his harness. It takes pilot strength. Send one of your men with me, keep the gun on the girl. If I try anything, you know what to do. Lagos nodded to his biggest enforcer, a hulking man with neck tattoos. Go with him, Any trick kill him. Vance moved past the guns, into the dim cabin. The 5 huddled figures, children ranging from maybe 8 to 15, watched him with wide, terrified eyes. He gave them the smallest nod, a promise he couldn't keep. The enforcer jabbed the gun into his back, prodding him toward the rear galley and the small access panel to the equipment bay. The bay was a cramped, dark space of wires and hydraulic lines. The shut-off valve was a large, red wheel. As Vance knelt, pretending to struggle with it, he spoke, his voice low. "You know Lagos is going to kill you all, right? Once we're on the ground, too many witnesses." The enforcer grunted, "Shut up and turn the valve. He's going to keep the pilot and the blind girl. The rest of you are loose ends." Vance's fingers found not the valve, but a heavy, titanium fire extinguisher mounted to the wall. You ever wonder what happened to the last crew that worked for him? A flicker of doubt in the enforcer's eyes. That was all Vance needed. In one fluid motion, he wrenched the extinguisher from its bracket and swung it like a battering ram. It connected with the man's kneecap with a sickening crunch. The enforcer screamed, his gun firing wildly into the ceiling of the bay. The shot was deafening in the confined space. Vance was on him, smashing the extinguisher down on his wrist, hearing bones snap. The gun clattered to the floor. Vance grabbed it, turned, and fired 2 shots through the access panel into the main cabin. He wasn't aiming to hit anyone. He was creating chaos. Screams erupted. He heard Lagos shouting. Vance burst back into the cabin, gun raised. Lagos had Ilara by the hair, using her as a shield, his pistol pressed to her temple. The other guard was aiming at the huddled children. "It's over, Lagos," Vance yelled over the scream of the engines. "The fuel's gone. We're going down. You kill her, you kill your only ticket." The plane gave a violent lurch. A real one this time. The left engine sputtered and died. The nose dipped. They were going down, for real. The jungle canopy rushed up to meet them through the windows, a sprawling, unforgiving green. Lagos's eyes met Vance's. In them, Vance saw not fear, but a bitter, final calculation. The man smiled. Then he did the unthinkable. He shoved Ilara violently toward Vance, turned his pistol, and shot his own remaining guard in the head. Then he put the barrel in his own mouth. The final shot was lost in the deafening roar of tearing metal as the Gulfstream's wing clipped the top of a mahogany tree, and the world dissolved into a spinning, screaming vortex of darkness. Consciousness returned in a symphony of pain. The world was inverted. Vance was hanging upside down in his harness, blood dripping into his eyes from a gash on his forehead. The cockpit was a mangled cave of shattered glass and twisted metal, the early morning jungle light spearing through broken windows. The screaming had stopped. The only sounds were the hiss of escaping oxygen, the creak of settling wreckage, and the relentless buzz of insects. He fumbled for his harness release, crashing down onto what was left of the ceiling. He looked to the jump seat. Ilara was there, still strapped in, her head lolled to one side, but he could see the rise and fall of her chest. Alive. Behind him, the cabin was a scene of carnage. Lagos's body was crumpled against a bulkhead, his skull a ruin. The other guard lay where he fell. The 5 children were stirring, moaning, tangled in their blankets and seatbelts, but moving. They were alive. Vance's pilot brain assessed. They had crashed in a shallow valley, shearing through the canopy. The fuselage was broken open like a tin can just behind the wings. Fuel smell was strong, but no fire, not yet. They had to get out. Now. He crawled to Ilara, unbuckled her, and gently lowered her to the floor. Her eyes fluttered open, unseeing but alert. She gripped his arm, her fingers spelling rapidly on his skin. "Outnowfuel. "I know," he whispered. "Can you walk?" She nodded, wincing as she put weight on her ankle. Sprained, not broken. Vance turned to the children, 2 boys and 3 girls, their faces blank with shock. He switched to the Spanish he'd picked up flying South American routes. "Listen to me, we have to leave the plane. It could explode. Follow me, now." He helped them disentangle, ushering them toward the jagged tear in the fuselage. One boy had a broken arm. A girl was bleeding from a scalp wound, but they were mobile. As they stumbled out into the oppressive humidity of the jungle, Vance took one last look back. His eyes locked on the open equipment bay. The enforcer he'd beaten was gone, only a smear of blood leading out the other side of the wreck. The The man had survived and fled. They regrouped 50 yards from the plane, under the cover of enormous ferns. Vance did a head count, 7 total. Him, Ilara, 5 traumatized kids ranging in age from maybe 8 to 15. They had no food, no water, and only the clothes on their backs. The plane's emergency locator transmitter would be pinging, a beacon for everyone. The good news, rescue might come. The bad news, the first to arrive would be Kronos' people. "We need to move," Vance said, tearing strips from his shirt to bind the girl's head wound and fashion a sling for the boy's arm. "We can't stay here." "Where do we go?" the oldest girl asked, her voice trembling. Vance looked at Ilara. She was kneeling, her hands splayed on the damp earth, feeling the vibrations. She pointed uphill away from the wreck and spelled a word in the dirt. "RIV." She'd heard it, the sound of running water. Survival 101, follow the water downstream. It might lead to a road, a village. It also might lead to people loyal to Kronos. It was their only option. They moved in a slow, painful procession. Ilara, despite her blindness, navigated the uneven terrain with an uncanny grace, her hands occasionally brushing against tree trunks, her ears guiding her. She was their most alert scout, hearing things long before the rest of them. After an hour of brutal hiking, she froze, holding up a hand. She pointed to her ear, then made a cutting motion across her throat. Silence. Vance heard it too, the distant, rhythmic thump of helicopter blades, not one, two, getting closer. He shoved the children into a thicket of giant elephant ear plants. They crouched, holding their breath. The helicopters, black and unmarked, circled the crash site twice, then descended. He heard shouted orders in Russian-accented Spanish. Kronos' cleanup crew, they'd found the plane. "We have to keep moving," Vance whispered. "Now." They reached the river as the sun reached its zenith, a brown, sluggish ribbon cutting through the green. Ilara knelt by the bank, cupping water to drink after Vance checked it for parasites. As the other children drank, Vance took stock. They were exhausted, dehydrated, and utterly exposed. They couldn't follow the riverbank without being seen from the air. Ilara tugged his sleeve. She took his hand and spelled a new sequence, not letters, numbers, a set of coordinates, then a single word, SAFEHOUSC. Vance stared at her. "You have a location in your head." She nodded, then spelled FATHERCONTINGNCY. 2 years ago, Kronos had dictated a series of emergency rally points to his lieutenant over sat phone. Ilara, sitting unnoticed, had memorized every digit. The nearest one was a hunting lodge, 15 miles to the northeast, stocked with supplies, weapons, and a satellite communicator. It was their only chance. But getting there meant crossing Kronos' search grid. It meant trusting a blind girl's memory with their lives. Vance looked at the 5 children depending on him. He had no choice. "We go," he said. The journey was a test of endurance. Ilara became their compass. She would stop every few hundred yards, tilt her head, and point a new direction, avoiding what she called bad sounds, the distant crack of a branch, the unnatural silence of a waiting ambush. She was using her hearing to map the jungle in a way Vance's eyes never could. By late afternoon, they were closing in on the coordinates. That's when they found the first body. It was a man in tactical gear, sprawled across a game trail, his throat slit. Fresh, less than an hour old. Vance pushed the children back, his heart hammering. This was Kronos' work. This was messy, personal. They crept forward and found 2 more bodies, all dressed similarly, all dead. A silent firefight had happened here. The hunting lodge came into view through the trees. It was a sturdy, rustic building on stilts, and it was occupied. Smoke curled from the chimney. A jeep was parked out front. Vance motioned for the group to hide. He had to recon. He left Ilara with the children and moved like a ghost to the tree line. Through a window, he saw a man with his back to the glass, cooking over a wood stove. He was humming. Vance's blood ran cold. He knew that profile, the set of the shoulders. It was Rook, Kronos' head of security, the man he thought had been killed in the Caracas hangar. Rook was alive, and he was here. Vance slipped back to the group, his mind reeling. Ilara read the tension on his face. She spelled a question, WHO. "Rook," Vance mouthed. Ilara's face went pale. She shook her head violently, then grabbed Vance's hand and spelled with desperate speed. NOTROKIMPOSTOR. What? Vance whispered. She explained, her fingers flying. The real Rook had a tell, a slight limp from an old bullet wound. The man in Caracas didn't have it. The man who died in the hangar was a double, a plant. The real Rook had been here, running Kronos's contingency network, waiting, but the bodies outside, that meant someone else had found the lodge first, and Rook had dealt with them. A voice called out from the lodge, calm and familiar. You might as well come in, Captain Vance. I've been expecting you. And bring the children, they must be thirsty. Vance had no cards left. He stood, helping Ilara to her feet, and led the group out into the clearing. The man who looked like Rook stood in the doorway, a friendly smile on his scarred face. He held no weapon. Please come in, you've had a long day. Inside, the lodge was warm and stocked. The man gestured to a table laden with food and bottled water. The children stared, torn between terror and hunger. Eat, he said, you're safe here. Who are you? Vance demanded, positioning himself between the man and Ilara. You can call me Rook. It's the name I've used for the last 5 years. He leaned against the counter. The real Rook, the man whose face I wear, died in a warehouse in Manila. I took his place. My employer has been trying to get close to Kronos for a very long time. The children are evidence. Ilara is the master key. Who's your employer? Vance asked, his hand inching toward a knife on the table. The man smiled. Interpol, Special Crimes Unit. My name is Inspector Marcus Thorne, and you, Captain, have just delivered the single most important witness in the history of human trafficking to my doorstep. The relief that washed over Vance was instantly crushed by a new dread. Interpol, that meant governments, protocols, extradition. Kronos had judges and politicians on his payroll in a dozen countries. An Interpol safe house could be compromised in hours. Thorne saw his suspicion. He pulled out a secure satellite phone. I'm calling in extraction. A team will be here in 6 hours. We'll get you and the children to The Hague. Testimony, protection, a new life. He turned to Ilara, his voice softening. You're safe now, Ilara. You can tell us everything. We can stop him. Ilara had been still, her head bowed. Now she lifted her face. She spoke for the first time Vance had ever heard, her voice a soft, clear whisper. No. Thorne frowned. No. She reached out, her fingers finding Vance's arm. She spelled a single word, TRAP. Then she spoke aloud again, her words aimed at Thorne. You hummed a tune, a Russian lullaby. Kronos's mother was Russian. He hums that song when he's nervous. You're not Interpol, you're his brother. Thorne's friendly demeanor vanished. The smile became a razor slit. He sighed, as if disappointed. You really are too clever for your own good, little bird. He raised his hand, and from the loft above, 3 armed men rose, their rifles trained on the group. Yes, I am Nikolai, he said, Kronos's half-brother and head of internal security, and you are all worth far more to me dead than alive. Except you, Ilara. Papa is very cross with you. He wants his ledger back. Vance moved, but a rifle butt slammed into his kidney, dropping him to his knees. The children screamed. Nikolai walked over to Ilara, grabbing her chin. All those years, listening, remembering. You were supposed to be a silent vault, not a whistleblower. He looked at his men. Kill the pilot, kill the children, make it look like the rival gang did it. We take the girl and go. As the rifles were leveled, a new sound cut through the lodge. A high-pitched, repeating beep. It came from Nikolai's own pocket. He pulled out a small pager, his face going slack with disbelief. The screen showed a code Vance recognized from Ilara's earlier message. The Swiss bank dead man's switch. Ilara smiled, a terrifying, cold expression. I activated it, she said. When we were in the river, I used the satellite phone in your jeep. I dialed the number, the one you didn't know I knew. Nikolai stared at her, then burst into a rage. You little bitch, do you know what you've done? Outside, the jungle erupted with the sound of vehicles and shouting in multiple languages. Not Interpol, not Kronos. The financial trigger had released the encrypted dossiers to the FBI, to MI6, to the Colombian National Police, and to every rival syndicate Kronos had ever double-crossed. They had all followed the money, and the money led here. The door of the lodge exploded inward. The war for Kronos' empire had just gone public, and they were standing at ground zero. The next 60 seconds were a blur of muzzle flashes and shouted commands in 4 different languages. Men in the black tactical gear of a Colombian police unit poured through the doorway, only to be met by gunfire from Nikolai's men in the loft. A separate group, dressed in civilian camouflage and bearing the tattoos of a Mexican cartel, breached a side window, adding to the crossfire. Ilara's financial trigger hadn't just summoned the authorities. It had sent a dinner bell to every predator in Kronos' ecosystem. Vance threw himself over Ilara, shielding her with his body as he shoved the other children under the heavy wooden table. Bullets ripped through the walls, sending splinters and dust raining down. Nikolai was screaming into a radio, calling for extraction while firing his pistol toward the door. Through the chaos, Vance saw his chance. The jeep outside. If they could reach it, he grabbed Ilara's hand and shouted at the children, "Stay down, crawl to the back door, now." They moved in a low, terrified huddle. A Colombian officer spotted them and yelled, "Alto, stop!" But his order was cut short as a cartel gunman shot him in the chest. The lodge was a meat grinder. Vance reached the back door, a simple wooden slab, and kicked it open. The jeep was 20 feet away. The keys were likely inside. "Run," he roared. The children sprinted, Ilara keeping pace, her hand locked in his. They piled into the jeep. Vance slid behind the wheel. No keys. He tore open the glove box and there they were. He jammed them into the ignition. The engine turned over with a roar. As he threw the jeep into gear, Nikolai burst from the lodge, his shirt bloody, a pistol in each hand. He emptied a clip at the jeep's tires. The front right tire blew, sending the vehicle slewing violently. Vance fought the wheel, keeping them from flipping. They careened down the narrow jungle track, the rim sparking against stone. In the rearview mirror, Vance saw the firefight at the lodge intensify. A helicopter, this one bearing Interpol markings, descended into the clearing. The cavalry had arrived, but the battle was far from over. The jeep, hobbled by the blown tire, could only manage a painful, grinding pace. They couldn't outrun anyone. Vance steered them off the track, bumping into a denser part of the jungle, hopping to find cover. They didn't get far. The jeep's axles snapped with a sickening crack, wedging them between 2 massive trees. They were on foot again, but now they had a new problem. The financial data Ilara had released was a live wire. Every agency, every gang knew her face, her name, her value. They were the most hunted people on the planet. Ilara, sensing the jeep's final stop, was already out, ushering the children into the brush. She turned to Vance, her face set with a grim determination. She spelled on his arm, "Notoverhecomes." Kronos, of course. His entire empire was crumbling in real time. His money was frozen. His allies were turning. His secrets were headlines. He would have one final move, a personal one. He would come for the architect of his ruin. He would come for Ilara. "We need to split up," Vance said, the horrible logic of it settling in his gut. "They're looking for a group, a pilot and 6 kids. You take the children, follow the river south. There's a town, maybe 30 miles. Find a priest, a doctor, tell them everything." Ilara shook her head, her fingers flying. "Notogthyoucantfly. I'm not flying anymore," he said, his voice breaking. "I'm bait. I lead them away from you." Before she could protest, the sound of a single, approaching vehicle cut through the jungle. Not a truck, something quieter, an electric ATV. It stopped 100 yards away. A door opened and closed. Then, silence. Vance pushed Ilara and the children deeper into the foliage, drawing the pistol he'd taken from the lodge. He moved toward the sound, every sense screaming. He found the ATV, parked neatly on the trail, empty. On the seat was a single item, a leather-bound book of poetry, Kronos' book. A calm, educated voice spoke from behind him. "I believe that belongs to me, Captain." Vance spun. Kronos stood there alone. He wore a linen suit, now stained with sweat and dirt. He looked like a businessman who had taken a wrong turn on a hike. He held no weapon. His hands were empty. "Where's your army?" Vance asked, aiming the pistol at his chest. Dissolved, Kronos said, a faint smile touching his lips. The rats are fleeing the ship. It's what rats do. It's just us now, the man who flew my prison and the daughter who betrayed me. May I see her? No. She's not my daughter, you know, Kronos said, taking a slow step forward. Biologically, but in every way that matters, I made her. I took a frightened blind girl from a slum and I gave her purpose. I gave her a library. I gave her a world above the clouds. She was my memory, my conscience, in a way. You're a monster, Van spat. I'm a curator, Kronos corrected softly. The world is full of beautiful, fragile things. People break them, I preserve them. Ilara, she preserved the truth, a pure, unedited record, until you poisoned her mind. She has a name, Ilara Vasquez. Kronos' smile faded. She is Ilara Kronos. I offered her family. She chose to be an orphan, he sighed. This ends one of two ways, Captain. You hand her to me, I walk away with her, and you and the other children can vanish. I have one account left, untraceable, enough for you all to disappear, or you can try to shoot me. But if you do, the men I have sniper positions in the trees will kill every child you're protecting before you hear the shot. Your choice. Vance's finger tightened on the trigger. He believed the threat. Kronos always had a final layer of protection. This was checkmate. A small voice spoke from the jungle. I'm here. Ilara stepped out from the trees, the 5 children huddled behind her. She walked forward, her clouded eyes aimed in the direction of Kronos' voice. She stopped next to Vance. Ilara, my dear, Kronos said, his voice dripping with paternal warmth. Come home, all is forgiven. Ilara didn't move toward him. She spoke, her voice clear and loud, meant to carry. You kept me to remember the children, the ones you sold, the ones you killed. I remember them all, every name, every face you described. 217. Kronos' face tightened. That's enough. Maria Santiago Lihua Kofi. She began to list names, a relentless, quiet recitation. Anya Ben Sophia Quame. Stop it, Kronos hissed, his composure cracking. You made me your ledger, Ilara continued, taking a step toward him. But a ledger has 2 sides. You only read one. My side has the truth, and I have shared it with the world. You have nothing left to curate. Your collection is empty. In a flash of rage, Kronos moved. He pulled a small silver derringer from his sleeve, not aimed at Ilara, aimed at Vance. Then I take the one thing you've chosen. The gunshot was deafening, but it wasn't the derringer. From the tree line, a single sniper round rang out. Kronos staggered, a look of profound surprise on his face. He looked down at the blossoming red stain on his pristine linen shirt. He dropped the derringer, then slowly sank to his knees. A figure emerged from the jungle. It was the enforcer from the plain, the one with the broken wrist and knee. His face was a mask of pain and fury. He held a smoking rifle. He looked at Ilara and gave a single, sharp nod. Then he vanished back into the green. He was one of the names, the brother of one of the lost. Ilara had remembered him too. Kronos coughed, blood flecking his lips. He looked up at Ilara, his creator looking at his creation one last time. You were my masterpiece, he whispered. Ilara knelt before him. She reached out, her fingers finding his face. She traced the lines of his jaw, his brow, memorizing him in her own way. And now I am my own, she said softly. Kronos died there, on the jungle floor. The aftermath was a controlled whirlwind. The Interpol team, led by a real Inspector Thorne whose identity had been stolen by Nikolai, secured the area. Nikolai was captured trying to flee. The children were medically evaluated and placed into protective custody with promises of asylum. The network, unraveled by the financial data and Ilara's testimony, began to collapse across 3 continents. Vance and Ilara were debriefed for weeks. They were offered new identities, relocation, a quiet life. Vance accepted, Ilara did not. At their final meeting with authorities in a safe house outside Geneva, Ilara made her demand. She would not disappear. She would use her memory, her notoriety, to testify publicly. She would become the face of the survivors. She would fund and run a foundation dedicated to finding lost children, using her unique understanding of how the networks operated. She wanted a platform, and she wanted Vance to help her run it. Vance looked at the girl, now a young woman standing tall in a simple black dress, a white cane in her hand. She was no longer a prisoner, a ledger, or a victim. She was a force of nature. "You sure you don't want that quiet cafe in Paris?" he asked, a weary smile on his face. "The coffee is overrated," she said, echoing words he didn't know she'd remembered from a joke he'd once made in the cockpit. "And there is work to do." 3 months later, the Chronos network was dismantled. 37 arrests were made across 9 countries. 204 children were identified and rescued, their locations pulled from the financial records Ilara had unlocked. Vance stood on a balcony overlooking Lake Geneva, the paperwork for the Vasquez Foundation newly signed on the desk behind him. Ilara joined him, her face turned toward the sun. "I never thanked you," Vance said, "for saving my life on the plane with the Braille note." Ilara smiled. "You are welcome, and I never thanked you," she said, "for learning to read it." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, folded card. She handed it to him. It was a business card. Embossed on it, in official, raised Braille, was her name and his partner's. He ran his fingers over the dots, understanding the message without translation. They were not pilot and passenger, not protector and ward. They were allies, forged in the darkest sky and bound for whatever came next. The world thought the story ended with a crash in the jungle, but for Arlo Vance and Ilara Vasquez, it was just the first leg of a very long journey. And this time, they were choosing the destination. So what is the real story here? Is it a tale of rescue, or is it something more profound? A pilot, trained to navigate by instruments, was blind to the truth right beside him. A girl, living in literal darkness, saw everything with perfect clarity. Their survival wasn't about escaping a crash. It was about learning to speak a new language in the dark. We often mistake vulnerability for weakness. We look at what someone lacks, their sight, their freedom, their power, and we write their story for them. But Ilara Vasquez rewrote her own. She was kept because her captor believed her blindness made her a perfect vessel. Silent, dependent, instead it made her the perfect witness. She heard what others ignored. She remembered what others chose to forget. In the end, the weapon wasn't a gun or a plane. It was a memory, a ledger of names. And Captain Vance, his heroism wasn't in defiance. It was in listening. In the moment he chose to feel for dots on a page instead of fighting against his chains, he opened a door. True strength isn't always about refusing to cooperate. Sometimes it's about knowing who to cooperate with. Their story forces an uncomfortable question. How many Ilaras are out there right now, not necessarily blind but overlooked, silenced, presumed powerless? The people in the background that the powerful never think to guard against because they don't see them as a threat. The maid, the driver, the quiet child in the corner. History is littered with empires that fell because they underestimated the person they thought was just pouring the coffee. Arlo and Ilara's partnership proves that rescue is a two-way street. He gave her a path to the ground. She gave him a reason to fly. They didn't just escape a cage. They built a foundation from its wreckage, turning a record of horror into a tool for hope. So what did you think? Was Ilara the true hero for holding the key all along, or was Vance the catalyst she needed to use it? Did Kronos' poetic end, killed by the ghost of his own crime, feel like justice, or was it too clean for a man of his horrors? Let me know your take in the comments below. If this story of hidden strength and silent communication resonated with you, please hit the like button. It truly helps others find this channel. Share this with a friend who appreciates a thriller where the smartest person in the room isn't the one shouting. And subscribe for more deep dives into the stories that remind us that the most powerful forces are often the ones we never see coming. Thanks for listening.